Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Walk to Wealth podcast. If you're tuning in on YouTube or any of the podcast directories, we just ask that you do us one teeny tiny little favor. If you could just refer us to a friend, if you find any value in this episode or have found value in the episodes prior, the biggest thank you can give us is to just refer us to one friend so that we can continue impacting lives on our walk to wealth. Without further ado, I have a very special guest with me, Chelsey. For anyone that may not know you, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you and what do you do?
Sure. So my name is Chelsey Newmeyer, and I'm a time management and productivity coach. So I mostly work with entrepreneurs and solopreneurs to ensure that they are building a schedule and a life that supports their dreams and their mission as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so, Chelsey, before we get into today's conversation, tell us a little bit about your walk to wealth. I know you have quite the interesting story, especially coming out of college and diving into an entirely different field. Like, tell us a little bit about where does this whole story begin?
Absolutely. So I've always been a time management and productivity nerd. I was like that straight A kid in school, like that kind of classic example of a kid, overachieving kid. And I went to college for biomedical engineering and realized about sophomore year that it actually wasn't going to be a great fit. I was getting some minors in marketing and writing and really excelling and then really enjoying those classes. So I graduated as a biomedical engineer because I figured an engineering degree is never going to hurt me. And I loved the learning. I just didn't like the
Hmm.
work that I was going to be doing. So I fell into development and fundraising and started working for universities and independent schools and have been in the fundraising space for the last decade or so, a little over a decade now. And I absolutely love it because it's all about building relationships. It's all about the strategy and understanding, and I'm supporting the causes that I truly believe in. So it's been a really wonderful experience. But along the journey, I was constantly having conversations with my coworkers about how to get more done. Nonprofits are kind of a classic example, similar to entrepreneurs, where we have a lot to do. We don't have a ton of resources to do it, right? The option to hire more people, the options to pay more for another tool is just not always available. So we had to get creative, we had to get strategic, and we had to be really efficient and well organized. And so I was just helping my coworkers out in that space all the time. And I loved it. I was happy to do it. It was something that brought me a lot of joy. And so when the pandemic hit, I wasn't commuting anymore. And that gave me about an hour or so back in my day where I could finally sit down and start my business. So I started Chelsey Newmeyer, my company, in 2020 and has been absolutely loving working with nonprofit leaders, but like also I said, entrepreneurs as well.
That's an amazing story. And I wanted to kind of touch on the subject of being able to pivot. It's something that it
Hmm.
seems was very, very important. First, with getting a degree in something that you ended up not doing any work in, and then pivoting again once the pandemic hit to find an opportunity to branch off and start doing your own thing and truly find a way to make a living doing something that you are genuinely, passionate about and you love and fulfilling that purpose. So tell us a little bit about how were you able to pivot more, I should ask, in both those times? First in college while you were a lot younger. And when you're young, you tend to be hard because it's like, oh, I don't know what I want to do. And I want to do this. And spent these 4 years getting a degree in this. So tell us a little bit how you pivoted there. And then tell us again after that how you pivoted at the pandemic and not just weren't paralyzed by fear, but still found a way to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will say that if I could go back in time and do it over again, I would actually probably do it the exact same way. Because going to engineering school was one of the best experiences. It introduced me, one, to an amazing people who are still my best friends. I have a phenomenal friend group, but it made me work so much harder than I was used to and surrounded me by people who were different from me, who were smarter than me, and it really, really pushed me. So going back in time, I would still do it again in the same
Hmm.
way. But being able to pivot was really, at the time when I was younger, it was really hard. I didn't have the trust in myself yet to know that I was making the right decision. I know it was really hard for my family to understand how I could invest so much time and energy and money into an engineering degree and then transition into working into the nonprofit space where I was definitely bringing down the average salary for first year graduates.
Yeah.
I knew that that's where my strengths were. That's what I was really good at. And it made me so excited to be a part of those teams. So I just went for it. I was like, I trusted that along the way, I just kind of had to put trust in myself that it was all going to work out. And
Hmm.
knowing that I was leaning into my natural strengths was going to get me further than trying to force something that
Mm-hmm.
wasn't the right fit. And then during the pandemic, starting my business, I had an amazing mentor who helped me when I was getting started. And I always felt like such a flake. So I was kind of changing who my ideal client was. I was changing some of my services. I was
Mm-hmm.
nervous about this. I started this way. And she one day was like, "It's your business, Chelsey. Do whatever you want. You can change your mind. It's okay to change your mind. It's your business." And it was just such a light bulb moment for me and something that I think about all the time. Like, we're allowed to change our mind. We're allowed
Mm-hmm.
to figure out what works best for us. And if we try it and we don't like it, we try something new. And that was such a great lesson for me to learn at that time when it is really scary to start a business and put yourself out there and not know what kind of feedback you're going to get right away.
Yeah, definitely. It's taking that leap of faith into the entrepreneurial world.
Hmm.
It's a little easier when you're between like the degree and into nonprofit because you get the job, you're getting paid, but from being paid to not being paid on a weekly, it's definitely a whole nother animal to trying to face off. And you were able to overcome that, and now you're helping others. And so, when did you realize? You mentioned kind of you've been helping your coworkers. A lot of the time, when we're good at something we just kind of see it as something that it's just regular. Like, for example, you may be good at, in your case, it was productivity. Someone else's case, it may be helping people learn how to draw, and other people might be learning code, learning how to
Yeah.
work out. But like, usually when you're good at something, you tend to undermine it. And you don't find it as valuable as someone who's not you yourself would see it. So, how did you realize that it was something that you could actually turn into a business and realize that, hey, like these strengths are actually something that people find value in, and not just something that you're good at, so you just help out here and there.
Yeah. That's a great question. So I started working as a tutor at some point along a couple years ago. I was an executive function tutor for high school students. And so I was working with, at the time I was working for an all girls school. So they were all girls, ninth grade to 12th grade. And it dawned on me at the time, like this stuff isn't taught explicitly in school. We're not naturally inclined. Not everyone's naturally inclined. People struggle, especially people who are a little bit neurodivergent. If you have ADD or ADHD, like you can really struggle with some of the time management functions, with productivity, with breaking projects down into manageable bite-sized pieces. And I absolutely loved working with those students. And that's when it really dawned on me that this is something that adults will benefit from as well, because it's not taught in school. Sometimes we get lucky if we have a teacher who will help us break down a big project or show us some scheduling tools. But I also work in the nitty gritty of how to manage your inbox, how to work your calendar. What tools and systems do you need as an entrepreneur that can help automate some of your processes, right? So we talk big picture about productivity mindset and this stress and pressure that we put ourselves to just have output. Before we hit record, we were talking about the hustle culture, and we see it everywhere. This feeling that we just have to be doing something and that our value is put on what we produce. And so we start with all my clients really high level of making sure that they don't feel guilty when they're taking a break, that they trust that they're their most valuable asset to their business. And so they have to take good care of themselves. And so it really starts up there. And then we get down to the nitty gritty and of time blocking. And then it's like, okay, great, but how do I actually execute this? Right. Because everyone can put a plan together, but how do you actually execute the plan? So that's a very long roundabout way of answering your question of
Yeah.
I started teaching high school students and realized how incredibly valuable this is for adults and for people who don't benefit from the traditional time management advice out there, which is often written by people who are in a much different place in their life, higher level executives who can afford to outsource and get the resources that they need done. So it's been a really fun journey, and I love the uniqueness of each of my clients being able to focus on their personal productivity.
Yeah, so then let me ask you, because a lot of people they get caught up in goal setting and accomplishing things and checking things off to-do list, only to later on realize that they've been living a successful life but unfulfilled life. And I wanted to ask you, so how would you define productivity then?
Yeah, I love this because definitions are, excuse me, so important. And I want to make sure that when I am healthy but productive, we're all talking about the same thing, right? I define productivity as ensuring that you're working on the right thing at the right time. It's going to move you closer towards your goal. So if you look up the definition of productivity, it makes you sound like a robot, right? It's based on the amount of input versus the amount of output, right?
Mhm.
And when I'm talking to clients, we really focus on what's the input, right? What are you putting into? How are you taking care of yourself? How are you ensuring that those tasks are adding value towards your business and towards your goals? So yes, I've defined productivity as working on the right thing at the right time to move you closer to your goal.
Okay, so then let me ask you, because one thing that we're always told by a lot of different successful people, motivational speakers, coaches, et cetera, is that you should model success. And a lot of people tend to take that to the extreme and say, oh, well, they're waking up at 4 in the morning and going to the gym and then doing XYZ for 7 hours straight. And then they have an interview at the weekend and then they have a lunch and then they take their kids. And it's like they'll literally try to replicate everything minute by minute, second by second. So how does someone model success? Because it's always harder to reinvent the wheel, right? I just read a quote was like, you can tell who the pioneers are because they're usually the ones with the arrows in their back because
Mhm.
they went into war first. So it's like, how does someone model success, but also not get too caught up in that? Okay, I'm trying to replicate a life that's not mine, that's not feasible for me.
Yeah. I was inspired to start this business, like I said, after reading some really terrible productivity advice. And this one particular book talks about, how he took a nap in the middle of the day and blocked out a whole day a week for deep work with no meetings and had his assistant prepare the agendas and have everything laid out before all of his meetings. And he multitasked during meetings. I don't think at the time I was working in a traditional office, I was going in every day. I was like, great, who's going to tell my boss I need a couch in my office? Who's gonna, how can I just not respond to my supervisors or my colleagues for an entire day because I'm having a deep work day? I was so annoyed by it. And that's when it really clicked to me, like, productivity is personal. You need to figure out when you work best and how that ideal week or day is going to look like for you. So if we're just copy pasting Mark Zuckerberg's or Elon Musk's 5 a.m., 4:30 a.m. schedule, that's never going to work for you unless you have the same resources and lifestyle that they do. Because frankly, they're not doing their own laundry. They're not cleaning their houses, right? Like, they don't have the same kind of general life management stuff that the rest of us do.
Hmm.
So when we're talking about productivity, it's really personal. When I work on time blocking, I think about things like, are you a morning person or a night person? If you're a morning person, then you need to make sure that those morning blocks are kept sacred on your calendar as much as you possibly can so that you're working on the right thing at that right time and you're able to get that done most effectively and efficiently. I'm much more of a afternoon focused person. So I really like having my meetings in the morning because I'm also an extrovert. The meetings get me hyped, they ramp me up. I'm re-energized after talking to people. And then afternoon, I can focus and get much more work done at that time. But if I was constantly forcing it because society said that you get more done in the morning, then I'm going to just get frustrated that it's not working in the way that I think it should be because that's how everybody else is seeing it. So I model success by trying to make sure that my schedule best reflects how I work best and maximizes my natural tendencies and strengths. And I really encourage my clients to do that as well. But the whole underpinning thing of it is that life happens and we have to be flexible. And so it's not just about building this rigid schedule that causes you stress the minute the thing runs over. We have this tools and the skills in our back pocket to be able to adjust and be flexible when we need to.
But then let me ask you, because you mentioned being a morning person or afternoon person like yourself, or maybe a night person. It's always easier, I feel like, to keep that time sacred in the morning just because like no one's up. So it's like you kind
Yeah.
of, it's a little easier. But like, regardless of whatever your time of the day may be where you're most productive, how does one then keep that time sacred? And then how does one then articulate that to someone else so that the person that may be trying to reach out to them doesn't get offended? And it's like, hey, I'm not trying to block you out of my life, but this is my time, but without kind of saying it and sounding like a jerk.
Yeah. Oh, such a good question. This is that like scary B word, right? Like the boundaries like conversation. That's really important. So a couple recommendations here. One, you got to kind of live and breathe or marry your calendar, right? You got to live and breathe by the calendar, marry it, own it, and block off the time as you need to. If you like me, like you guys, us with podcast scheduling, that's something that can really quickly get out of control if you don't like watch when you're doing it. So utilizing something like Calendly where you can block off how quickly people can put things on your calendar or what times they can do that. So use your calendar, block off when you're going to get certain things done and when you're going to allow certain things to happen. Using podcasting, for example, right? We only record on Wednesdays. So you have your Wednesdays blocked for that. Where flexibility shows up in that is to say, oh man, John, I can't record on Wednesdays. I'm always in these meetings all day long. That's where we can kind of go back and forth with finding a time that works best for both of us. But keep that boundary until you need to be flexible otherwise. Most of the time, someone isn't going to push back if you present the time first, right? So if I said, all right, Jen, I would love to record. I'd love to be a guest on your show. Thursdays Thursday mornings work great for me. Does that work for you? Right? They don't need to know. You don't need to know that Wednesdays I've had blocked off because I want to work on something else, right? So be proactive with scheduling, present the times that work best for you first. And if they come back with another time where you had something already scheduled, you can decide if you want to be flexible, but you don't have to be, right? You can go back and forth, work it out, and try to be as diligent as possible. And a couple other quick tips, don't feel the need to apologize for it. I think it's really easy to say like, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm not available. Be really sorry. Probably not, right? Like you own your time and you don't have to give an excuse
explanation
either.
Right.
Yeah, you don't have to explain it.
Yeah, no, I've seen this video by Eric Thomas, and he was talking to somebody, and he's like someone that's now achieved massive success in the public speaking world. So it's like getting him is extremely difficult. But it's like one person had asked him like, "Hey, can you do a birthday party?" And he will pay you like super well or whatever, blah blah blah. And he was just like, "No," and he went on to talk about like how no is a full sentence. Like just saying no, no explanation after, no excuse, no sorry, no apology. It's like no is a full sentence, and you should be able to say that and not have to worry about, oh, was that rude or was that too upfront or straightforward or blunt? And so a lot of people forget that, as you kind of said, like no it's okay to say it, and there's nothing that needs to preface it or come after it when you do say it. You kind of mentioned a little bit too that I want to touch on about keeping that time block sacred, but allowing for life to happen. What would you tell for people? Because let's say our favorite celebrity goes live. Oh shoot, I can't miss it. How does one then prioritize what's actually important, like I can't miss type things, and what's not? Where's does someone use to kind of like filter out what technically is worth it? Like maybe my kid needs to get picked up from school, but like they could also wait for the bus because their tummy hurts, but it doesn't hurt that bad. Like what advice would you kind of give there?
Yeah. So I'm going to take your question in two parts. The first part is when life happens, like when something exciting comes up, right? Like something you want to take advantage of. I really like leaving a lot of buffer time in my schedule. And the way I do that is when I'm time blocking, I use really big blocks of time and I'll theme those blocks. So instead of saying something super specific, like I'm going to write a blog post from 9 to 10 a.m., I'm going to say from 9 to 11, I'm going to create content. So it's a little bit more loose, especially when you're just getting started in this. It allows for that flexibility. It allows you to say, okay, well, I actually got done a little bit earlier than I anticipated, so I'll be able to move things around. Or you can start judging how long things will take you if that's enough time to get as much content done as you thought you could. So leave a lot of buffer because then you can also move things around when things get fun, right? All I'd have to do if my favorite celebrity popped on is just scoot that time block around and make it work. The second part of the question is really about prioritization, which is such a big conversation because as solopreneurs, as new entrepreneurs, we have to do all of the things. And so how do we recognize what's the most important Obviously, some of this is values based, right? So if your kid is sick, right, and your kid has a tummy ache and it's a choice between picking them up or taking the bus, that's a values based decision where you're going to decide what makes most sense for your life and where that lies. When it comes to business, though, we want to look at the tasks that are going to move you closer to your goal. So I give the example of building your website. You need to build the website, sure, it's a priority when you're starting your business. But updating your website weekly, unless that's bringing you a lot of revenue, probably not a priority, right? That tends to be a space where people can dump time because they think they're being productive, but it's not actually moving you closer towards your goal. So that's the question you ask yourself is this task moving me closer towards one of my goals? And that's how I help people prioritize.
Let me ask you, a lot of people, when they're trying to set a goal, they're trying to move closer to their goal, end up finding themselves kind of stuck in what we call the 80% tasks that are things you kind of need to do, but and not that serious, but it's still part of being an entrepreneur and running a business. And they tend to do that to kind of hide away from the things that will actually move them forward.
100%.
And so it all is like a procrastination, just but not your it's not your typical procrastination because you're still doing something. Like it's not like I'll just wait to do it later. It's like, no, I'll just do this instead. It's another form of procrastination. It doesn't seem like procrastination, but still plagues a lot of people. So what kind of advice do you give to there to help combat that, I guess you could say, so that we focus on those tasks that make us move closer to our goal?
It's a classic case of procrastinating planning, right? It's where we will take a task that feels good because it has a definitive start and end, and it's much easier to do than the other things on our list. So I could do a whole episode on procrastination. I love talking about procrastination, but the high level answer to the question is identifying why you're procrastinating on that particular task is a really, really important first step to then matching it with a way to overcome the task. So let's again give the example of you're choosing to tinker with your website over starting a podcast, which is going to grow your audience, which is going to increase your revenue, which is going to promote you as an expert, right? All things that are moving you closer towards your goal, but you're choosing to tinker on your website first. So to me, that sounds like someone who doesn't know where to get started, right? If the task on your to-do list is start a podcast, that's a huge task. That is not something that can be done in one afternoon. There are multiple steps there. So in that case, my recommendation would be break that down into the smallest possible pieces. Maybe the only thing you're getting done on the podcast today is naming it, which is a really hard job right off the bat, right? So
I told you in the pre-show, it took me 4 months to come up with mine.
Exactly. Or maybe you don't want to hold up on a decision. So maybe it's find what platform you're going to use to host the podcast, right? Recording your intro episode. There's all these really small steps that need to happen to start the podcast. So procrastination in that case is really just about knowing where to start and then overcoming a bit of fear of failure too, right? What if the show doesn't work out? What if I sound stupid? What if I don't understand how the tech works? What if it takes me a really long time? And to that, it's really just about taking messy action. And I have no more sophisticated answer or solution to overcoming fear other than no one's paying more attention to how things go and sound than you are. So just keep putting stuff out there and trust that you are going to get better the more you do it.
No, definitely. That's an amazing line. There's you might have heard it, but it was two groups of, I think, students, and they were both, the goal was to make the perfect vase, right? Or vase, or however you pronounce it. And the first group, they had all the information. They were looking up information. They spent the majority of the hour, the time allotted to pretty much just researching how to do it. And then they made like a really, really good vase. And the second group, they just started making them they didn't research anything. They just started making them. And it ended up being that the second group ended up making a better vase. And it goes to show that imperfect action beats perfect inaction every time. And so, as you kind of mentioned, it's like it's better to do it messy, better to be imperfect and be in action than waiting for that perfect name or that perfect thing. And so, I also wanted to ask you a question on topic. What procrastination sometimes ends up being because we're actually in pursuit of a goal that's not meant for us to be pursuing. How does
Yeah,
one differentiate whether or not it's just us not knowing where to start or where to begin, or is us actually not being aligned with what we should be doing?
that's a big. I I think some of that is just getting that trust in yourself that you are doing something that feels good, feels right for you, feels right for your life, the life goal that you want. One of the ways to overcome procrastination is honestly a little bit of visioning. So closing your eyes and thinking about what that final product is going to look like. How is it going to support the ideal day or vision that you have for your life or for your business? So I would just recommend taking a step back, right? Close your eyes and picture what it feels like, what it looks like when you reach that goal, when that goal is accomplished. And does that sit well with you? Does that resonate? Is that meaningful for you? Or is it feeling off track? Is it feeling icky in how it's sitting with you? But I wish I had a more sophisticated answer to that question because it's a great question.
Yeah, no, that's definitely something along the lines of what I would say is envision your life 5, 10 years from now, and how do you envision yourself living? And if that's something that's going to help push you to where you want to end up being. Like for me, I just had an epiphany recently where it's like real estate, I stopped focusing as much time on it. I'm still in it. Have a couple clients that I'm working with, but it's like I have been spending so much more time in this podcasting stuff because it's so much more fulfilling.
Yeah.
And to the mission that and my purpose that I have in life. And for me, it was more so procrastination as not that I was scared or didn't know what to do. It was just more so that my original goals that I had set weren't as aligned to my life mission as I originally thought they were.
Yeah.
And having back to what we mentioned earlier on, the confidence and the awareness to know when to pivot and shift a little bit has been working out in my favor. And so we've been talking about productivity and procrastination a little bit so far. What are some, factors in life that we should consider to kind of get back to the topic of like a scheduling and things like that and time blocking? What are some of the factors that we should consider when we start trying to make our schedule, when we start like trying to be more productive?
Yeah. The first step is doing a bit of a time audit, making sure that you are seeing how you're spending your time. You may be surprised by what's taking you more time than you anticipate and where you're wasting time around. We all deal with distractions. So how much of that, how much of your time is being spent on distractions and things like that. So yeah, my first recommendation is always a time audit. It will help with future time blocking. Again, recognizing, does it take me an hour to write a blog post? Does it take me 2 hours to write a blog post? How much time do I need to leave for certain things? And how much time am I wasting that I need to build up some buffers or utilize some tools or resources to keep myself focused?
There's like a saying that hyper, efficient people block out their schedules in like 5 minute increments. What's your thoughts there?
No, it's a terrible solution. I used to be one of these people, and the second you go over that limit, it's just like chaos, and it causes trickle of stress and overwhelm. So, no, keep those blocks nice and big and loose. Give yourself buffer, and you're much more likely to be set up for success that way.
Yeah, and then as you said, things start to trickle over, and it kind of leads to a stress avalanche. You could probably, if you could imagine that, it's like the stress just keeps on building up, and there's so many like things we can do as an entrepreneur. How do you mentioned setting big blocks and prioritizing, but how can we start to really get from all this giant cloud of things that we do and funneling it down to our key metrics and our important tasks? Like, what are some things that no matter what business or industry you're in can help you move forward and be productive so that you have that buffer time in the afternoon or the morning or whenever to still live your life?
Yeah. One of my favorite strategies is to do kind of like a brain dump or unclutter your brain or mind sleep. They call them all kinds of things, but getting all of the tasks and ideas out of your head onto a piece of paper will really just help you, one, focus, because then you're not managing all of the things that are swirling into your brain that can be really distracting. But two, it helps you recognize what's actually a priority. Because as you're writing it down, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I got to get that done this week because I owe it to a client, for example. So it'll just help you recognize what's a priority, what can be delegated to someone else if you have that option, or delayed until the following week or at a time when it makes more sense? Or what can just be deleted? What have you been carrying with you for months, whether that's an idea or a task or something that when you probably may not even need to do anymore, may not make sense to do it anymore, or it's just not important right now. And that's okay to kind of let those things go. So start with that brain dump. And from there, you can create a much more efficient and effective and manageable to-do list for yourself every day.
Yeah, definitely. And as entrepreneurs, we tend to have that freedom and that flexibility to create our schedules as we please. So a lot of us end up becoming slaves to the schedules that we created. I want to ask you though, for the people that still are juggling working a traditional W-2 job, what advice would you give there? Because I know you were able to start your business due to the pandemic. We're kind of coming out of it now where life is getting back to normal, where not everyone's trapped in the house anymore. Some people are still obviously working from home, but some aren't. Life is starting to get back to normal slightly. And we may not have as much free time because, some of us may have to go back to work and things like that. So what advice would you kind of give to the people that are still juggling all these jobs or maybe they volunteer or these other things that while they're at them, they can't really spend time working on their business because they're busy with their work that's in front of them? What advice would you give there so that they can start these businesses and hopefully get them up to the point where they can leave their jobs to be full time?
Yeah. And to be honest, I'm still a nonprofit consultant. I'm a contractor, so I still work client hours outside of my business. Like, totally relate to this question. And my best answer is really to just try to be as present as possible wherever you are. I think where people can struggle with this is when they're trying to jump from task to task. That context switching can really waste a lot of time because you need to get up to speed on whatever the next thing is. And so if you're switching from your full-time job to your business and then back and then dealing with kids, and it's too much scrambling, too much stuff happening. So try to keep them as separate as possible. I know that's a really, really easy answer to give, but the bigger answer is whatever you're doing, be really present there to keep that boundary, try to keep that trust in yourself that the things that you need to get to, you'll get to when it's the time to work on your business, when it's the time to work for your full-time job, when it's the time to take care of your family.
Yeah. And as someone that is still working in the nonprofit space, there's sometimes you can't get things done. And sometimes we have people who are like super hard set on timelines. And it's like when they get there, it's like it causes a lot of anxiety. But like with SMART goals, the last is time bound, right? But usually if you don't measure something in terms of time, you just end up sometimes procrastinating it and it never gets done. So where's that healthy medium? So you're not, building immense amounts of anxiety because of the timeline that you created, but then you're also just not like having no timeline at all, where it's like, it'll happen when it happens and it never ends up happening.
I really like recommending like process-based goals for new entrepreneurs because when we're setting goals as a new entrepreneur, we can say easily like, okay, great, I want to have a business that I want to make $100,000 in my business, right? And that can feel really ambitious and exciting, but kind of arbitrary if you don't take a step back to say like, okay, how do I actually get there, right? Like, is that even possible with the pricing and packages and capacity that I have to help manage clients? A process goal, on the other hand, is measuring the work that you do and that you have full control over. So let's say I want to grow my audience on Instagram. I can't necessarily control the fact that I'm going to have 1,000 followers at the end of the year, but I can say I'm going to post 5 times a week. I'm going to engage on Instagram for 30 minutes a day in the DMs or making comments. Those things you can control. And the other thing that's nice about process goals is that you can see what is having an impact. If you're consistently posting 5 times a week and you're not seeing that change happen, you're not seeing your follower count increase or the amount of engagement increase, then you know that might not be the right move for you. Maybe you need to kind of evaluate what you're posting or the frequency. So it's easier to make adjustments rather than just having those big end of year goals that feel very far away and feel really arbitrary and overwhelming.
No, that's an amazing idea because that's something that I kind of learned for example, in real estate as an agent, it's like 3 to 20 is it 3 to 20? 321. There we go. 3 hours lead gen, 20 contacts made, 1 appointment is like the formula or whatever. And that's something that's process based because we can lead gen for 3 hours. That's something that's in
Hmm.
our power. We can make 20 contacts and just gotta, whatever it is, whether it's dialing or calling or
Yeah.
whatever it may be. And then 1 appointment is usually that's feasible, but closing a house and getting, I don't know, 20,000 in commission, that's something that's more like the end goal.
Yeah.
That's not process oriented, not in our control, but as long as we control the hour and the input, the output will eventually show up. What advice would you give to people? Because as an entrepreneurship, a lot of the times our efforts feel as if they're all for nothing pretty much in the beginning because the input and output don't really
Right.
uh,
Yep.
equate much. It's usually a lot of input before any output ever comes. So what advice would you give there for people in terms of time blocking? Because they might be doing something that is actually important and then they don't get the results that they thought they were going to get at first because that's going to take some time. And then it's like, oh, this clearly isn't something that's important to my business.
I've loved having a coach. I've loved working with an expert. I think having someone that you can bounce those ideas off of, someone who is a bit third party, who can look objectively at the work you're doing and give you feedback on it, someone who's been there, done that, and has been able to make that adjustment is really, really incredibly valuable. If you can get a coach, if you can afford to invest in yourself in that way, I highly recommend that for most new entrepreneurs. And the other piece of it is if you're not ready there yet, if you don't have those resources yet, is to have fun with it, right? Like
Hmm.
we can afford to play, you can afford to change your mind. It's your business. So if you're trying something out and it doesn't feel good, adjust. But that's also unfortunately also balanced by stuff has to take time it takes time for stuff to work out, right? You're
Yeah.
not going to instantly have 1,000 followers or 1,000 downloads on your podcast, right? You have to be consistent with it. Actually, that's probably the best answer is be consistent with
Yeah,
whatever you're
definitely.
doing.
My podcast, it took a while for me to really start growing. It was hard at first because that's like a lot of these platforms, they give you that initial like those are following or view count, or so they get that dopamine hit, like, oh my goodness, I'm making progress. And in reality, that's not actually how much followers or views you're going to be getting. So like that happened kind of for me with my podcast with like my initial couple episodes did super well and then super well, relatively speaking. And then the next after that, we're barely getting any downloads.
Hmm.
And then it slowly started making its way back up. And now I'm coming off back to back of my pretty much best months in terms of podcast downloads.
Yeah.
And it's starting to grow. So that's like, as you said, but I've been showing up. I've been doing the do. I've been posting the content. I've been here and there and stuff like that. And I think one of the things that really helped me out is this is something that I didn't do to get paid.
Hmm.
And so that helps me keep on going when I don't see results because I know that I came in this just trying to genuinely give back, which is kind of what we were talking about earlier in terms of like aligning your goals with what you want to do and
Yeah.
why you're procrastinating might be not because you're scared, don't know what to do, but it might be because you're actually not in the right area and devoting the time into the right place. I kind of want to ask you too a little bit in terms of like, now that we have an idea of time blocking, how to, prioritize, how to become more productive, what are some like software tools and tips that we can become more efficient, more as our time so that we can just become machine and focus in our activities that are actually going to push that needle forward and generate us more business.
Yeah. So I love my calendar. I use Gmail, but I also have to use Outlook for some of my other client work. And so making sure that those calendars talk to each other and are married nicely is super duper important. I love tools like Calendly that allow that scheduling to happen and check that I'm
Hmm.
not going to double book myself. But there's a ton of amazing tools. I'm actually super low tech when it comes to it.
Really?
I'm just a paper and pen kind of girl with my to-do list every day. My to-do list is like, okay, it's like a half sheet of paper
Uh,
that I've printed on the other side. So I'm pretty low tech when it comes to how I manage my tasks. That being said, the best system is one that works for you, that you can stick to and be consistent with. So when I work with clients, I'm happy to recommend all kinds of tools that I've experimented with, that I've tried, that work really, really well for some people. And the most important thing like I said, is that you find something, you're consistent with it, and that you are able to see the value at it. You invest the time to set it up correctly, and then you really use it correctly.
Yeah. So then let me ask you too, then, because with all the scheduling out there, there's iPads now that you can schedule stuff with and get planners, and then there's physical planners, and then there's people like kind of like yourself that just kind of write on a sheet of paper what they have to do. There's people who have calendars. I know my girlfriend, she was like, she has an iPad that she uses for work, but she was like looking for like iPad, like planner downloads that she could potentially use to incorporate into like managing her time and her tasks and stuff like that. What advice would you give to, let's say you want to become more productive, you want to start getting into this stuff? How does one determine what may be a good fit for them and what may not be?
I think that really comes down to, like I said, personal preference. So knowing yourself is something that I talk a lot about with my clients. I really like pen and paper. It's something I've always been using it. I find it really flexible. I need that tactile flexibility.
Hmm.
Some people may be really comfortable digitally with a tool like Asana or Monday and want to have their list with them on the go or whatever they need to go.
Hmm.
So we could kind of ad hoc and or strategize different kind of best practices and tips. All of it, like I love doing that because there's
Yeah.
so many good tools and resources out there. But like I said, it's really just picking one and then making sure that you invest the time in it, because I think that's the other mistake that a lot of people make, is that they'll throw in, like, they'll just dump all of their stuff into an Asana board and then not actually like use it or really maximize the tool in the way that it's intended to be created.
Yeah. So how does one prevent themselves from turning their to-do list and their prioritization? How do they prevent it from becoming homework and actually use it to be productive? Because sometimes I'm like, oh, and it comes to the end of the day, "Ah, now I got to write out my to-do list for tomorrow. Oh, now I got to plan my week out." And so how does one prevent themselves from getting to that point where it's not just another chore, but something that actually is productive to their overall day and their success?
Yeah, I mean, I think coming at it with a little bit of gratitude is really important, right? As you get this time freedom, this was either a choice or an opportunity that you had to take advantage of. And I think about the things that I get to do rather than the things that I have to do. And so making sure that you, as you mentioned, writing a to-do list the night before is really important. It sets you up for success the next day. And making the tasks that are like things that you just don't want to do, right? We all have things that we like just don't want to do. Adding some fun in your day, adding self-care in your day, making sure that you're taking care of yourself, making a favorite playlist that you listen to while you work every day, having a little bit of a work ritual that gets you into that mindset and that ready to work space can be
Hmm.
really fun. So just make it fun. We all started our businesses, most of us anyway, to have that time freedom, to have that flexibility to work on the things that we want to do. And as much as we can make it fun, I would really, really recommend taking advantage of those opportunities.
Definitely. And Chelsey, you've been dropping a bunch of gems throughout this entire episode about productivity and prioritization and making sure that your calendar's in check and making sure that your day and matches and reflects the lifestyle that you want to live and not just becoming a slave to our own calendars as most of us fall victim to a lot. Where can people find out more about you? Where can we get in touch with you if we want to learn more about and become more productive?
Sure. So my Instagram is Chelsey N Coaching, and that's Chelsey with a Y. And then all of the different ways you can work with me are all on my website, which is chelseynewmeyer.com.
Amazing. And Chelsey, now it's time for my favorite segment of the podcast, the final four questions.
All
So,
right.
question number one, what is the most impactful lesson that you learned in life?
I honestly think it was this coach who said, it's okay to change your mind. I was so worried about appearing like a flake. I was so worried about what other people thought. And that was just such an empowering message that I remind myself of every day.
What is the most admirable trait that a person can have?
Kindness, being thoughtful to others. And it's not necessarily about putting everybody else before you, but just being kind, I think can go a really, really long way.
If you had to change someone's life with one book, what would you recommend?
Well, this is a very tough question because my heart wants to say something really fun and fiction. And so I don't know if I can pick one book, but just something that brings you joy. And I think as entrepreneurs, we spend a lot of time wanting to just like self improve
Yeah.
all the time. And I just have to have fun. So just a book that brings you joy.
What's your fun?
I've been really into these like fun fantasy books recently. So anything by Sarah J. Maas has been just really, really fun.
Okay. And then the final question is, what is the legacy that you're trying to leave behind?
I want to leave a legacy behind that is one of personal productivity. So empowering people to take control of their time and feeling really good about the work that they're doing and the life that they're living. And then my husband's in the Navy. And so
Mhm.
my bigger kind of family legacy is that I want to be able to allow him the time and space and have the resources to pursue whatever he wants to do when he gets out of the Navy.
That's amazing. So, Chelsey, it was a pleasure having you on. I had a great conversation and I took away a lot myself that I'm going to try to implement into my personal productivity. So, I'm
Great.
one of those people that fall asleep to their calendars and timelines. So, this is definitely a wake up call over on my side of things. So, I definitely appreciate you having you on.
Of course. Thank you so much, Don. It was a lot of fun.